Okay, is this correct?
Yes.
Perfect.
Give people a few seconds to come on in. Awesome. So do you want to go ahead and get started? It's 3:30, so as people pile in.
Hi, should I start, Caitlin? Would you like me to start personally?
That works, yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janice Gobert. I'm a professor at Rutgers School of Education of Learning Sciences, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Inq-ITS. These are inquiry intelligent, we call this Inquiry Intelligent Tutoring System. And today we're going to be talking about using science labs built with AI that improves student outcomes. And Mike is going to drive the slides for me. And would you like people to be able to stop and ask questions when they're ready, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely.
Whatever.
I think, just to do some quick housekeeping, is that oftentimes I'm going to be demoing, or Janice will be demoing, and we might not be able to see your happy faces. So please write questions in the chat, and Denise and Caitlin, who work with us, will stop us and interrupt to make sure that we can address your questions on the spot. And in some cases, Denise or Caitlin might be able to answer them for you right in the chat. So feel free to ask away.
Yes, please.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Mike. All right, so we'll be talking about Inq-ITS. So first of all, typical assessments are really poor at measuring what we need measured vis-a-vis the next generation science standards. So for example, you have a multiple choice or fill in the blank. These are not authentic. They only capture really factual knowledge, very minimal reasoning. They're easy to grade, but they put kids in 4 bins. Now, if kids could be in 4 bins, your job as educators would be much easier, because there's far more greater range in students' capabilities than just 4 bins. Another problem is, which I'm sure you're aware of, is that students can guess. So there's a lot of false, a lot of guessing, a lot of false negatives. Summative and high stakes tests, bottom left, rely on multiple and open choice items. These are also not very good at getting at students' competencies. Feedback may be given too late to help students learn. Typically, those come the next school year. And students struggle in silence because they're not good at knowing when they need help. And even if they do, they don't want to raise their hand and ask for help. A typical type of assessment are lab reports. Lab reports rely on hands-on labs. Let me skip to hands-on labs for a second. Students often lack the skills to complete these independently. They require equipment, materials, setup time, space. They're difficult to grade. This is the lab report component. You'd have to walk around the class, watch them, and then get the lab report and grade that. So the rigor and consistency is also difficult. So lab reports capture work products, but not processes. They're difficult and time intensive to grade, and they may not capture what students know and can do. For example, students are often not good at articulating what they know in science, or conversely, they can be just parroting. So these create kind of kids at both ends of the spectrum, kids who are not doing the science practices, but can parrot what they've read or heard, or use ChatGPT to fill in the explanation. That's a nightmare. Or kids are really good at the science and math, and sometimes they can't articulate what they know. We'll talk more about that in a second. Next slide, please. So here's a typical classroom. This demonstrates what I was talking about, I think, pretty well. So you have Billy there on the right. Billy's a science genius. Look how focused he is, right? If all kids were like this, wouldn't our jobs be much easier? Billy's a science genius who can do all these practices of science, form testable questions, collect data, interpret data, warrant claims, but he gets to the claim evidence reasoning and he's not as good at articulating what he knows. So this student is really difficult to assess with a hands-on lab or a lab report. Conversely, we have John. John's not even doing the experiment. Look at John, he's just watching. John could be the kind of kid who generates a claim evidence reasoning statement, basically catching the buzz in the classroom, but he's actually not done any of the inquiry processes or practices leading up to that. In fact, we have data to show this. We did some research to show that if you rely on lab reports and students writing, you're misassessing them between 30 to 60% of the time. That's a huge percentage of the time, right? 30 to 60%. So the US News and World Report picked up that story from me and that finding from me in 2016, May 2016, if you're interested in taking a look at it. Next slide, please. So we built an assessment system and an intelligent tutoring system and now an alerting system called Inq-ITS. Inq-ITS stands for Inquiry Intelligent Tutoring System. What these are virtual labs that assess and personalize learning. They're for physical life and earth science, middle school up through grade 10 or 11. They have standards aligned content and they address students' difficulties with science inquiry. They address difficulties with the math associated with science and difficulties with the writing used in science. So really the student is honing competencies in science, math, and ELA. These provide faster, rigorous, class-wide and individual assessment for formative and summative assessments, both, and they permit differentiated learning because you can see exactly who's lacking competency in this specific practices, put them in breakout rooms or handle them separately in small groups in the classroom. There's no installation required. You only need a web browser and internet access. They work on iPads, Chromebooks, PCs, Macs, and laptops, and they're integrated with Google Classroom and with Clever. So here's a sort of an overview to how the system works instructionally in your classroom. So you see on the left, there's a young boy, working with our simulations. That forms the backbone. That's the backbone for forming a hypothesis or question, collecting data, interpreting data, doing the mathematics associated with that, warranting claims, and then writing claim evidence reasoning statements. As you can see on the bottom there are patents. We have 3 patents. In the area of assessment, scaffolding, and alerting, and those are embedded in our Inq-ITS system. So while the students work, at the top you see reports, alerts, and tips. This is for your use. These are actionable reports, so your grading is virtually eliminated. Then you get alerts as you're walking around the class in real time. You're getting an alert that says, hey, Janice doesn't understand how to collect unconfounded data. Go over to her. Or 70% of your class is having trouble with the exact same practice. Stop the class. When you stop the class, or whether you're in one-to-one mode, you'll get what's called a TIP. That stands for Teacher Inquiry Practice Support. And what those are instructional tips for what to say to students to help them in real time. Because what we found, we did some research for the National Science Foundation, that many teachers were defaulting to content support. So the problem with content support, I mean, that's useful. However, if you're trying to teach aligned with NGSS, you really need to focus on the practice, and the practice is what can transfer across science topics. So we've done some research like that, and I'll tell you about that later. Also, while the student works, you have a virtual tutor named Rex, the handsome dinosaur there with glasses on. And here, Rex jumps in real time, just when the feedback is needed. So the student it's not on-demand help, because as I said before, students are not good at knowing when they need help. And even if they are, they're not going to raise their hand. Remember, these are middle school and high school students, and they're very sensitive about asking for help. So our tutor jumps in when the system needs it. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the empirical data supporting Rex in a minute. So in addition to Rex, for students, we have this authentic inquiry vis-a-vis these labs. We have about 160 of these labs now. We have Rex, our personal tutor. He comes with Spanish glossaries and Rex help in Spanish and some baseline activities in Spanish. And these were all built and vetted with a specialist who is an ELL specialist for STEM. Leah Palazzi, she's really excellent. And she's been working with us on those glossaries, that Rex help, etc. In addition, we have student reports. Students typically, students, I think, really want to know how they're doing, and they want to do well in science and math. They think science and math are, smart subjects. Kids who are smart do well in science and math. And so they want to know how they're doing. So we built a simple, more qualitatively oriented report system for them to check on their own progress. You, of course, get much more detailed data that Mike will show you in a second. Next slide, please. So in terms of your usage, we have components for teachers and co-teachers that I alluded to before. So you have whole class reports. This will allow you to point out who's proficient, that's the dark blue on the left there. Who's acquiring competency as they work, that's the light blue that you see. And then who needs help, that's the yellow. And then if the student needs help, it behooves you to help them in real time. So how do you do that? Well, we designed the alerting dashboard, which I'll tell you about in a second. In addition to the whole class reports, we have individual student reports, and we have a whole host of these. But you can see there how much Rex help the students got, where Rex pops in, etc. So the student reports are very useful to you for tracking students' growth, of course. But in addition, if you have students on IEPs or special ed, you need to be able to see the trajectories of learning, because those students' learning trajectories are typically longer than your quote unquote typical student. Next slide, please. So this relates back to our alerting dashboard. Here you see this on the teacher's iPhone. So you can see that the teacher here in the middle gets an alert that says Taylor Read, and it's for collecting data, right? This is in the individual student mode. The teacher clicks on that, and then on the far right, you see Taylor Read is changing too many variables at once. Below that, you see some contextual information about that person's data collection that day, in addition to their hypothesizing score, collecting data score, and they're not yet on analyzing, so they don't have that any information there. If you look at the ink blotter in the middle, you see a number of students that are having trouble with collecting data. You might want to know, well, how many students are having trouble collecting data? You could switch to the class view using that little icon on the back that's on the bottom that says class, and it will tell you. It might tell you 70% of your kids are struggling with collecting data. So you can't possibly help 70% of your students, because they're going to be waiting too long and the class might end. So it's necessary for you to switch to the whole class instruction in the moment and use this support that we give you via Inq-Blotter. Next slide, please. So on the Inq-Blotter, we have these things called TIPS, Teacher Inquiry Practice Supports. And these are empirically validated supports that we derived from what teachers said to students in helping them in one-to-one that led to transfer on the next inquiry task. So here you have a series of different tips. You have an orienting tip, you have a conceptual tip, you have a procedural tip, and you have an instrumental tip. The one that's being shown right now is dark blue, the conceptual tip that says, remember, you should be running controlled trials. Controlled trials is when you change only one variable at a time. You might decide, depending on the student, to use a different kind of tip. For example, if you have a student who frustrates really easily, you might want to use an instrumental tip. And the instrumental tip is going to give the student very, very precise information about what they should do. And then it's really useful to say to that student, how is this different from what you've been doing so far? And that way it kind of gets reified in long-term memory for the student. So we have this functionality for teachers and co-teachers. This is very useful for special ed, or if you have team teaching in science. In special ed, for example, if you have a paraprofessional. If you have a sub, the sub can also use the co-teacher. Next slide, please. Aha, the next slide is the demo, and I will turn it over to Mike, who will give you a demo of what you've seen here.
Okay.
Are there any questions at this point?
Dan actually did ask a question, but Mike, I'll have you point out where exactly to find that. He just asked if you can see when students use Rex, but I think you'll be able to point that out.
Yeah, I'm going to do a very detailed demo of all of these capabilities and features. So hopefully that question will get addressed. I plan on addressing it all the way through. So let's see. Let me just make sure that I'm all set up and ready to go. Okay. So just to briefly summarize what Janice is talking about is at a very high level, we've made a set of virtual labs that are standards compliant, that are capable of automatically grading what students know and can do in thinking like scientists. And so this involves things like collecting data, forming questions, writing about their claim evidence, reasoning, all that great stuff. And because of that, because we have this auto assessment capability, we're able to do 3 things. And I'm going to demo 2 out of the 3 for you right now. I'm going to have, oops, wrong button. Oh, I got logged out. 1 sec here. And I'm going to have my alerting dashboard up so that I can watch and make sure that students are progressing well, just in case I need this, which I think I might. Yep. I'm going to do an example activity at the same time called Waves in a Drum. So this is the student perspective. And all of the different labs that we have feature different content areas and are designed to get at different misconceptions or difficulties that students might have in a particular topic area. So this one right here is about waves in a drum. And really quickly, I'll read the little introduction to you. So in this lab, you're going to investigate how different factors impact waves striking a drum. You'll see the relationships that might impact the wave speed, the pitch of the sound, the loudness of the sound, and you'll be able to manipulate different variables. So after a student has read these directions, then they'll be tasked to beginning to do their lab investigations. And this is probably the part that, one of the things that everybody's excited to see is, what does a lab investigation look like? And we have many different flows or different types of investigations, and this is a typical one for the middle school level. This activity has Rex active, meaning that if I'm making any mistakes in my scientific process along the way during my investigation, he's going to jump in and provide help. So to start off here, the goal here is to determine how the substance of the drum the medium influences the wave speed. So what I might say is I'm going to say what I'm going to change here. I'm going to say, well, I'm going to change the wave speed, or I'm going to change the substance in the drum. And then I think that the wave speed is going to, I'm going to say it's not going to change. And what I've done here is I've posed a testable question. I've identified an independent variable, the cause of something that might affect something else, and the dependent variable, which is the thing that's going to get affected. And I've specified a relationship between them. And so this question here is testable, so it'll let me continue on. And all the while, Rex is watching behind the scenes and making sure that I'm doing a good experimentation and following the processes that I should be following. The next part here is that the student needs to try and collect data to figure out if their hypothesis or their question is supported or not, and trying to generate some evidence that they can use later to back up their claim. So what a typical student does is they're probably going to change the variables a whole bunch of times, not be systematic at all. They're going to collect what we call uncontrolled data, or confounded data, same thing. And what Rex is doing is he's watching behind the scenes, and under the hood, we have implemented these algorithms that are capable of assessing students in a really fine-grained way. And when Rex thinks that the students are off track enough, he'll jump in and provide some support. So he'll say right here, well, I think the data that you're collecting won't help you test your hypothesis because you aren't designing a controlled experiment. And so you can actually ask Rex for more help. Or if the student is making the same mistakes over and over again, Rex's help will get a little bit more targeted, a little bit more directed for the student. Now, I also wanted to point out that at the same time, you as the teacher are able to track what all of your students are doing at the same time. So while students are working on their Inq-ITS labs, you have your alerting dashboard available. And this is like the magic crystal ball that lets you see inside your students' heads. Not only who is struggling, but when you click on their name, it tells you exactly how they're struggling. So as you saw, as I was just doing, is I was changing too many variables at once, so I'm not collecting good data. So you're notified of that immediately. And at that point, what you can decide to do is, okay, maybe you think that Rex will be able to help themselves because they're an independent student, they're good at learning on their own, but maybe you'd like to go over and help them instead. And if you're not quite sure what you should say, we have built-in support tips that clue you in of what to say to students to get them to think about the science practices and to keep you focused on helping students get better at the science practices, because those are the things that are really can undergird students' learning and transfer, because those science practices are the tools of the trade that you can use across science disciplines to foster your understanding and to understand how knowledge about phenomena is created. So these, as Janice had mentioned, these tips are all built in to help support you, and they are all based on expert teachers and what they were saying to students to help students get better at the science practices. So we actually did some really detailed research, listening at what teachers were saying to their students, and then triangulating that with the data under the hood generated by Inq-ITS and showing that, okay, when teachers said these different things, that's what led to more learning. So, right, there's really two key aspects here that you see what auto assessment is capable of, right? The student is able to get immediate feedback on their own while they're working, but then it also gives you information that lets you know when your students are struggling, how they're struggling, and some ideas on how best to help them. So for the sake of the demo, I'm going to be a good student here, and I'm going to try and collect some control data. So I'm only going to change the variable that I said I was going to test. So the substance in the drum, what I think the cause is that will affect the wave speed. And I also, while I'm collecting some data here, I also wanted to highlight something, is that though the interface actually looks kind of straightforward, right? It's just students collecting data. How difficult could that be? Well, there's many different right and wrong ways that students could be going about this, right? They could only collect one trial. Maybe they're running too many repeated trials. Maybe they're great at collecting control data, but not good at focusing on the question that they're going to test. Maybe they're focusing on the question, but they don't know how to collect control trials. And some of our more advanced activities where students need to graph their data and fit a best fit curve through their data, they may not be collecting enough data to see a trend, to see a mathematical trend, right? So there's so many different ways that students could go right or wrong. Built into our system, right, we've done all this research and watched how kids do labs to figure out ways that they could go right or wrong, and embedded all that in to make assessments, to make and give information to you and to give information to your students to help them get better. So the next part of this is that students need to try and analyze their data. And this is where they're forming their claim and backing up their claim with evidence. And so let's see what happened. Well, when I changed the substance of the drum, what happened to the wave speed? It actually, when I looked at my control data, wave speed actually changed. And so what this means is that my hypothesis was not supported. It was refuted. This is actually a big challenge for students to do, because they always start off thinking that, oh my God, my initial ideas were wrong. It's terrible. I got to go back and fix it. And what we're trying to help instill in students is an understanding, right, that it's okay to be wrong in science, that with new evidence, right, ideas can get changed as we discover more and more, collect more data, right, new inferences might be made. And it's okay to be wrong initially. And as long as at the end of the day, right, you have something that's consistent with what you're seeing. It's a growth moment, and it really helps students understand what science is about. We also ask students here to back up their claim by picking the evidence, picking and choosing which trials that they're using as evidence to support their claim, right? And again, here you can see that there's many different right or wrong ways that students could go about doing something like this. Maybe they're mixing and matching independent variables. Maybe they're not aligning to the original question that they posed. Maybe the trend in the data is not what they said it would be. Maybe they don't know how to back it up back to their hypothesis. Right? So again, all of these little nuances, all of these little aspects that students are doing, right? This is what we're using as assessment data, all these fine-grained choices, and being able to bubble that up into help for students and information for you about how your students are well and where they might be struggling. So the last part of this that I want to talk about is there's a claim evidence reasoning write-up. And we do this for a couple of reasons. One is that the writing isn't going away anytime soon, right? We want students to be proficient at communicating their findings and communicating themselves, right? That's actually a next generation science standards practice. But in addition, this also drives learning. By re-representing what you just did in your own words, it actually helps drive learning and long-term learning as well. We've done some neat research about that effect. Finally, by also having students write, you're able to get a metric not only on what students are able to do, so all the pieces that you saw before, that's all automatically graded. But now this part of where they're writing up their claim evidence reasoning in their own words, that's also automatically graded as well. So we're grading not only what the students are doing, but also what they're writing. And that way you understand what parts students are struggling with. Is it the doing of science or the writing of science, right? And there could be there's two different cases that Janice had mentioned earlier. Some are great at writing and not doing science. Maybe they're just good at parroting back what they already know. But then there's other students who, I'm one of those people who I struggle with writing quite a bit, but I was able to show and demonstrate, like by doing science, right? I can show something that I know, and maybe the writing was more of a challenge for me. At this point, I'm going to take a breath because I think the chat's lighting up with questions. Caitlin, is there anything that I should be addressing at this point before I continue on?
So let me go through here. So one of the questions was if you will be demoing the high school labs. And then there was also another question if there was a way for students to share what they write with each other via Inq-ITS.
Two good questions. So one, I can show a quick demo of the math stuff at the end of the rest of the demos, just to make sure that everybody sees what a different activity flow looks like. Students currently do not have the ability to share what they write with each other within Inq-ITS. However, students are able to see their own work. So when they're finished doing their, when they're finished with their write-up, they can actually share it in another way through a Google Doc or something like that. So they actually get a complete lab, finalized lab, if you will, of what they did. So they'll be able to see what they wrote and they could share it with students that could cut and paste this. Interestingly enough, what we found out through teachers' creativity is that these data that they collect with the simulation, you can actually cut and paste right into a Google spreadsheet, a Google Sheet or an Excel sheet and do further analysis on if you wanted to. So students could even pool their data samples if they wanted to with the simulations. Creative ways in which teachers have been using our system. Other questions?
So no, besides they said that that's so dope. That's exactly what I was looking for.
I haven't heard dope in a good couple of years. I love all the slang. I wonder, is that current slang now? Because like dope was slang for like 20, 30 years ago, but then everything comes back into style again, right? It's like 90s clothes is back in style now.
Exactly. And then we just had another question. They asked, do the labs follow state standards? For instance, they're in Texas, so they follow Tex.
Got it. Janice, I'm going to let you answer that. At least in terms of the science practices, the texts are very similar, if not identical, to the NGSS standards. But the content topics are meant to cover as much breadth of standards across the board as possible.
Right. Yeah, I don't know that I have anything to add. You're talking about the text that we're talking, the text that does the intro?
No, TEC, the TEKS, the Texas State Standards.
Oh, Texas, yes.
Yeah,
So-
TEX is the Texas, TEKS, TEX is the Texas State Standards for
Oh,
Science.
okay, yes.
Yeah.
So you know, we align very well to 21st century skill frameworks. And I don't think that they're very different in terms of the skills that we're looking to get students to develop, right? To think critically, to be able to communicate findings, to be able to do investigations. And the practices of science are all embedded in the next generation science standards. But if you're not a NGSS adopted state, which I know Texas is not, it does align to NAEP and science education frameworks, because those practices are echoed in all of those state documents and policy documents.
Correct. And I certainly know too that several districts in Texas have used Inq-ITS successfully. I do know that as well.
I was going to add that, yes. So we do.
Yeah, I don't know the exact number of schools off the top of my head, but it's got to be more than 50 to 100. Okay.
So Amanda just, sorry to interrupt, Mike. Amanda just added that Florida has a correlation with NGSS. They blend and many are the same. Exactly. So I think Florida's is actually called Next Generation Sunshine.
Yeah,
State.
NGSS, yes.
Exactly.
And what they call if I'm not mistaken, the science practices are referred to as the nature of science. It's a nature of science as well. It's sort of encompassed under nature of science, but the practices are all kind of the same, even if they have like a different label to them.
Exactly.
Yep. Interesting. We just had a call with some people from Florida like a couple of hours ago. So this exact question came up. So
yeah, then someone in Maryland is the same way. So it's basically all the same thing with the different.
Yes. Yes, it's all ice cream. It's a question of, do you like, chocolate sprinkles on or rainbow sprinkles or something slightly different, right? But all kind of taste the same. Okay, so the last part that I wanted to talk about is that, you've seen the alerts and you've seen what a lab looks like, and I am going to demo a math lab as well. That's on my mind. But I wanted to show you what a teacher report looks like. So not only do you get the instantaneous alerts, but all the data and all the things that students are doing are getting tabulated and tracked so that you have information about what your students did after the fact. So the summary reports here, what you're looking for, as Janice had said earlier, is more dark blue. More dark blue is better. And you get a high level view of how many of your students are proficient at what the different aspects are. How are they collecting data, analyzing data, explaining their findings, and so on. But then you can also see individual student performance. And I think someone had a question before, do you see what Rex helped? And the answer is yes. You can see where Rex helped the students on the different parts of the activity, how much Rex helped that they got. And furthermore, when you click on a student's name, you can get an even more detailed breakdown. So you see exactly what they did in every lab. And how, not only that, but how they were graded. So we also have our rubrics built in that explain how students are getting scored against our various criteria. So for example, what are the components behind forming a good question? When students are explaining their findings, what are the criteria on which we're grading against their writing, right? And what we found is that this is a really a more detailed rubric that breaks down practices that you find in the standards into something that's more manageable, understandable, and communicatable to your students to help them get better. And by having that level of standardization, right, you can track growth a little bit more easily over time. And this also provides a lot of supports for students and for you as well. So for when you have students who are doing hands-on experiments, and these are going into when you start having them do more hands-on open-ended activities, that they have a structure and a framework and an expectation of what they need to do to be successful at tasks like this. And you can also see what students did before and after Rex Help. So before they got Rex Help, how did they get scored? And then after Rex Help, what did they do? That's really useful too. And these are, of course, all printable. The reports are also downloadable, and at a very high level too. This platform, right? It's a no install platform. It integrates with Google Classroom. It integrates with Clever. You actually can post all of the grades from Inq-ITS right into the Google Gradebook automatically with a push of a button. So, right, we're trying to simplify and support your classroom flow. Even if you don't use those other tools, you can even, you can just use Inq-ITS as is by itself. Like, we have the same kinds of support features to make a class and share assignments with students and all that good stuff.
Like, sorry
And
to
go ahead. Yep.
I just had two questions that I
Sure.
didn't. So Keisha, hi Keisha, how are you? She asked if we can export the rubric to students.
We actually have some of that built in. We have a help system, and we are going to be rolling out a more student-friendly version of that. But that said, every lab that we have comes with that you assign to students. It actually has the expectations built in. So what students should be doing for each part of the activity. And it also has a claim evidence reasoning expectation. So all the things that I just went through with you, this is all built in about what we're expecting students to do for all aspects of this. And it also gives students an example of what a good claim evidence reasoning looks like.
I love
So
that.
they always have these supports available.
And we actually, Mike and I were just on a call yesterday. A lot of teachers, what they do is they'll put this on the board during the claim evidence reasoning, or they'll have the students pull it up. So to post in class, exactly. And so then Dan also asked, do they have to click the Rex help to move on, or can students ignore him?
So what ends up happening is that Rex purposefully prevents students from moving forward. The help, he doesn't give the same help over and over again. So if students are making the same mistakes, the what he's saying to them will change to get more and more targeted. But we want students to try and follow what Rex says. And it's important because if you think about when you're conducting a scientific investigation, if you don't even have a testable question, it doesn't even make sense to collect data. If your data are completely uncontrolled, you can't make a good analysis and infer something about the phenomenon. That said, we know that some students might frustrate easily. So Rex does time out after a certain number of hints. If the student is getting stuck in the same place, then he will turn off. But then if you're doing another lab with him, it'll turn back on again. And that's information that you get too as part of the reports, is that you'll be able to see like what students are doing with and without Rex help. But yeah, we really encourage students to pay attention to what he's saying, because the help is quite helpful. We've got at the end of the presentation, Janice is going to talk a little bit about the efficacy that we found with this type of system that we've done with rigorous research on it. But great question.
And Mike, Keisha had another note. You said that we are working on rolling out the rubric to students, correct?
Yeah, we want to revamp this a little bit. So this rubric right here, this is actually really good, but we want to perhaps add a little bit more detail to it. That's a little bit more akin to how things are being scored.
Awesome.
Yeah, so this is a good start. So this actually does align with what we're expecting, but we want to make it even a little bit more student friendly. And this is available. Every student has access to this every time you assign a lab. It's built right in. And actually, I can show you that right here. So this is the student perspective. So you'll see helpful documents right at the bottom, claim evidence, reasoning, expectations. So it's right there. Okay. One other thing I want to point out really quickly is that if you come from a district with a lot of, oh, that's interesting. My PDF plugin is not looking too good right now.
Before we move on to the Spanish, Dan just had one more question about the claim evidence and reasoning, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yep.
It says, one of the biggest issues I've had as a teacher is students seem to be is the reasoning. Do you have suggestions on what to look for to improve this part? So this is a comment, Dan. This is not just you.
This is everybody. And so from a practical perspective, what I have heard that works really well is if you think about the reasoning in terms of two components. The reasoning, one part of it is, how does your evidence back up your claim? So thinking about having students sort of think about, why is your evidence good evidence? What do you think makes it good evidence? Did it come from a good source? Is it actually saying the things and backing up what the claim says? So that's one part of it. The other part of it is what we think about as the justification, which is the scientific principles behind it. And that's probably the most challenging thing for students, is the justification, because that's where you have to start bringing in the cross-cutting concepts and the sort of for those who are not NGSS, it would be sort of like commonalities of what is common amongst all science disciplines. So things like thinking about systems, or thinking about energy or cause and effect, but also domain specific stuff. So what about the topic do you know? Maybe it's something about momentum, and you know that mass times velocity is the momentum, or something like that. That requires a little bit more understanding, and students having at least a little bit more background in the topic area to be able to like really understand that justification a little bit more. So I think what we found is that by having a rubric like this and really laying out what the expectations are of what goes into a good reasoning statement, that actually helps students quite a bit.
So Keisha actually, she uses Inq-ITS, and she made a suggestion, which Keisha, I've told other people that you do this, is that she made a Google sheet of the rubric, and she has students score each other.
Oh,
So it
cool.
helps them practice to understand what they need to put into.
Oh, that's really neat.
I know I've told other people about that since you've told me, Keisha, and I really like that idea.
So every time we meet teachers, we always hear something new. It's
I love that idea.
the possibilities are limitless.
Really.
That's exciting for me. And oh yeah, so as I was saying real quickly before, is that we do have vocabulary support for those who are Spanish speakers. So it's sort of documents that support what the English translation is into Spanish. And let me demo, and we also have all the topics available. You can search by standards, you can filter by the science domain area, so whether it's just physical science, you can see which labs have the auto-scored CER, and the using math ones. Let me give you a quick demo here. And we have more of these being rolled out now. We're actually in the process of developing them. So it's a similar look and feel to what you just saw, at least this particular flow, except when you're forming a question to start off, now you want to talk about the mathematical relationship between variables, right? So it's not just a change or no change, or increasing, decreasing stays the same. Now we start talking about mathematical relationships between variables. And then now I need to try and collect as much data as I think I need to support my question to figure out the mathematical relationship. And so I'm just going to collect a whole bunch of data here just to give you an example. And then what's different about this part now is that students need to then build a graph that sort of summarizes the data that they just found. So here they need to pick their axes. So let me see, I changed the amount of gold, and then pick and choose what data that they want to plot on their graph, right? And again, here they should be plotting only controlled trials that only vary, one variable, and that'll reveal some kind of trend in the data, whether it be linear or a non-linear thing. And then the next part here is that we want students to build a mathematical model. And so here they need to pick and choose what is the mathematical shape of the data that they make. They need to change the constant and coefficient, and they can see right away. This is sort of similar to what like a Desmos graph looks like. And we're trying to get them to understand, like we've made a design decision here that we want students to be able to get the feeling of what it means to make a best fit curve or best fit line through data, and to understand what things like a coefficient and a constant do to a graph, right? So when you change the coefficient, it makes it a little bit steeper. When you change the constant, right, it makes it go up and down on the y-axis. And I'm going to make and actually can zoom in a little bit more here. Let's see, I can actually zoom in my range a little bit so I can get a little tighter even. Great. Check my fit. Okay, I've got a really good fit in the data. And I will note too that we never have a perfect fit in the data. All of the simulations that we have for this all generate noise, right? Because we don't want students to get the idea that a mathematical model has to have a perfect fit. And then now they're doing, again, another claim evidence reasoning. And this time, instead of picking the trials, they're picking which graph or which graphs they're using to support their claim, right? And so you're going to want to pick the one that shows the trend through the data, the correct trend through the data, and that has a really good fit. And this is just one kind of math activity. We're also developing activities that have students make predictions. So once they make their mathematical model, whether it be the graphical the equation or the graph, is for data that they haven't collected, what do they expect will happen with the phenomena, and being able to identify limitations of their model. When does your model, your mathematical work, and when does it not work? And again, all of this getting tied together with alerts, Rex feedback, and being able for students to see how they're performing, and for you to see how they're performing in growth over time at these kinds of skills and competencies.
And
All
just
right.
to clarify, someone asked if this was for high school.
This is meant for some activities or grades. The math activities, I would say, is grades 8 through 10. And the middle school activities are more like 5 through 9, or maybe if students need remediation at grades 10, then most of the other activities would be for that. And I don't think I mentioned this, but we have about 160 different labs for physical life and earth science. So we've got multiple topics covered, all the domains covered. All right. I think I'm going to throw this back to Janice now. If there's other questions, we can address them at the end, but I wanted Janice to have an opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the efficacy data that we have with the system, about what happens when your students use this system.
Great. Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
So Inq-ITS is used in many ways. Some of you have used Inq-ITS that are on the call. We designed it as formative data for practices. We drive hard on the practices because we believe that that is the thing that transfers across topics. But in doing so, students learn the DCIs and they learn the cross-cutting concepts. Teachers use our data for summative prep, for example, and for summative assessments on practices, DCIs, and cross-cutting concepts. Teachers use it for a baseline for incoming new students in high school. Say, for example, if you have a regional high school and you have feeder schools into it, they use it as a review for summative state tests. And most schools report back that they see a gain having added only Inq-ITS and not making any other changes. So, for example, many schools have said that they see a 20% gain or 22% gain. This has been demonstrated in Arizona, in Oregon, in Massachusetts, in New Hampshire, in New Jersey as well. The schools that use Inq-ITS for at least 1 year, schools did better if they used Inq-ITS for 1 year than schools that did not. And we're doing a kind of a deep analysis of those data now. But if you just basically look at who used Inq-ITS versus who did not, schools that use Inq-ITS did better. Inq-ITS is used as a remediation strategy for struggling students in 6th through 10th grade, and also as an acceleration strategy for students who need to be challenged, for example. And the math that we're adding will be really a nice way for teachers to add, because they could run with the math or without the math. So for, say, 8th grade or 7th grade, if you've got some real STEM geniuses who love it, you know, you can run it with the math component. Next slide. Next slide, Mike.
Okay. Did it pop up?
There's gone. Thank you. So in terms of efficacy, you know, we have funding from the National Science Foundation and the U.S. Department of Education. And of course, they're very interested in efficacy, as are we, and I'm sure as are you. And I want to just overview many of our findings. So first of all, if you use Rex, we know that Rex hones students' competencies. As I was just saying, I believe that is the driver as a procedural driver to support students' learning, and that transfers across new topics and across long periods of time. So we, in fact, tested this up to 170 days with one treatment of Rex. So we ran 1 unit with Rex, and then we showed that the practices transferred up to 170 days. The school year ended, so it's possible that the practice transferred even longer. We also know that students are more systematic with hands-on experimentation after using Inq-ITS, and students spontaneously will say, hey, remember what we learned in Inq-ITS. We have to vary our target variable, keep the rest the same, for example. We also know that English language learners and special education learners and students on IEPs show marked improvement with Inq-ITS. We've had cases where kids are in the resource classroom for one semester and are able to return back to the regular science programming after one semester of Inq-ITS. During COVID, many typically at-risk students did better at home with Inq-ITS than they did in their regular classrooms during COVID. So we have a lot of data, for example, from Compton, LA, where they did better at home with Rex and Inq-ITS than they did in their classroom. We also know that as students do more labs, the standard deviation reduces. So that means the achievement gap is also reducing. And what's interesting about that is that with strategy training programs that ours is a strategy training program, you can think of it that way. Typically, kids who are really skilled get even better, and kids who are not as skilled kind of peter along. And what we've been able to show is it really brings up the bottom end by giving them really support on those practices, because that's what we believe transfers. As I said before, we have improved state science summative test results in multiple states. And what we take as a big win is we ran a big study where we asked students, what do you think about teachers knowing this really precise data or having this really precise information about how you're learning and how much you're learning, et cetera? And many kids said, you know, I don't necessarily like it, but I know it's important to my learning. Now, I'm really excited by that finding, because what I'm fond of saying is I am not in the entertainment business. I'm in the education business. And I think that the faster we get back to thinking about schools as communities for learning, the better off students will be. So we have our publications at the bottom. If you're interested in reading those things, or our patents, very exciting, you can take a look at our website. Next slide, please. So in terms of teachers, of course, you know that we're offering automatic scoring that greatly reduces your grading time of labs. Our algorithms match human scoring with up to 95% accuracy. And it helps you identify kids who are simply parroting and those who can do science but not successfully write about what they've learned. So that's like two ends of the bell curve, if you will. There's no other product, in fact, that'll allow you to do that. And this is really important because we've known for years that there are kids who are just parroting but really don't understand what they're talking about. It's a classic problem in science. And what we've been less knowledgeable about, but we were able to identify, and I wrote about this in US News and World Report, is that there's a large percentage of students too who are really good at math and science, but they come to the claim evidence reasoning statement and they're not good at articulating what they know in words. So our reports identify that for you. In terms of instruction, we know that Inq Blotter alerts enable teachers to give more personalized help to more students more accurately and more quickly than typical approaches. It helps teachers identify students that typically go unidentified. For example, the two at the end of either end of the spectrum that I just spoke of with regard to communicating findings. And then we also know that alerts and tips in Inq Blotter used by teachers lead to demonstrable student improvement. So when you use a tip, those are research-based tips that we gathered from things that teachers had said that we know lead to bona fide growth on the part of students. And we have a really nice publication on our site in the Journal of Learning Analytics where we talk about that. Next slide. So in closing, Inq-ITS is based on research regarding students' difficulties with science practices and misconceptions or alternative conceptions in science. It works for all students, regardless of gender, SES, ability, etc. and provides learning and transfer of science practices, learning of disciplinary content ideas, learning of cross-cutting concepts in science. For teachers, Inq-ITS and Inq-Blotter provide automatic, rigorous scoring of all students' inquiry processes or competencies, and provides automatic reports and alerts to know who to focus on and tips about how to help them, creating opportunities for deep discourse and equity in the classroom. Next slide, please. So we're very excited about some accolades that we've gotten. So for example, we had a little stint on CNN a couple of years ago. That was really cool. We were listed best for NGSS by Tech and Learning in fall 2021. We won an Innovation Showcase Award. We were given a 5-star rating by Common Sense Education. I spoke at the White House on this work in August of 2022. And I'm also on the PISA panel, which are designing the next generation of science assessments. And performance assessment like this will become the type of assessment that's used for state summatives. So everybody is moving towards this because we know that in science, what we need to be able to assess is what students can do in science, not whether they can, kind of rote parrot back a formula or something like that. That's not really usable. It's useful knowledge, but it's not really like the practices of science that are highlighted by the next generation science standards. Next slide, please. So here is a code for a 30-day free trial that we offer, and we will review your data with you after the 30 days. We're very excited by this. We're excited by what's going on with Inq-ITS, adding the mathematics components. And I believe that there's some kind of, the sales team can maybe talk about this a little more, but I believe that we're running a special that if you purchase in the next number of weeks, you get our math stuff that will be eventually an upcharge. So you get it as it comes out. So
Brett, feel free to interrupt with the offers, but I also did want to say you don't exactly need to scan the QR code. If you just go to inq-its.com and click sign up, you can go ahead and create an account. I know that QR codes can be intimidating sometimes. So, and then Brett, if you wanted to talk about
can someone give me access to the screen so I can show the coupon we're offering?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me stop my share. Okay. I think you should be able to take it.
Can you see it?
Not yet. I think you've got to screen share yourself.
Caitlin.
I don't have screen sharing, so and I don't know what you're sharing.
Yeah.
Oh, where is Brett?
That's where I should be, right under. Well, I'll go ahead. What we'll do is we're going to send you this coupon, and what it is, if your school makes a school-wide purchase, we're going to provide you with a free year of customized training, which is a $995 value. And this is what's included in the training. The initial training is 3 hours. And usually what we do there is we're just basically going through the logistics of getting on the program. And then the second, which are first semester session, is 2 hours. Now this time can be, it's flexible, but that's usually spent on reviewing the data to date. And then we have another workshop that's 2 hours. And again, we go into more detail about the data that's represented. It also helps measure the fidelity of what we've implemented or what we're prescribing that you do, so that Inq-ITS will have the impact at year end that you should expect. And then about a month and a half before year end, we have another, what we call a pre-high stakes planning. This is where you can focus more on certain labs that either there's some challenges, student needs remediation, we're specific to that. Another thing is the customized training. For instance, we had a school district in New Jersey. They wanted their first training to be showing them the correlation between Inq-ITS and their core curriculum, I think, which is Open Science. So they were a district that had used it the year before, and they just wanted to refine some of that training. But again, if you've got any questions, we're going to send this coupon to you, and whoever makes that the decision, or we're working towards that, just make sure that you use that and reference it so that we can apply that discount. And lastly, we want to thank you for all coming to this webinar. I hope you got something out of it.
Yeah, Brett, you can share screen now, I think. Should be able to.
I can't see what I can.
Well,
Maybe not.
we can send out to the emails too. So
Okay, that works. We'll send it out.
Here we
to the
go.
email. Ah, bingo.
there you go.
Woohoo, you got it. Yes.
I just impressed Mike. That made my day. I'm leaving now.
So we'll send you an email with this offer as well, but this is with a school purchase, free professional development included, to make sure it's getting implemented properly. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for hopping on. We really appreciate it. And then this recording will also be sent out as well.
And any questions, feel free. We are here. Thank you so much, everybody.
Questions, feel free.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was good.